Howdy, y'all! So, have you heard of this little film called Godzilla? Released in 1954, this film depicts the horrors of... you know what? I don't need to explain this to you. There's 1,954 videos out there going over the importance of this film. Legitimately, what else is there to say about it? It's a masterpiece that spawned the longest-running franchise to date. You know what? I'm not going to talk about Godzilla. I'm going to talk about Godzilla Raids Again. The first of many sequel films. Raids Again was rushed through production after the first film turned out to be a great success in Japan, releasing just 1 year later in 1955, and to say the very least, it has not been as well regarded as its predecessor. Whenever the talk of worst Godzilla films pops up, Raids Again is often one of the names that gets tossed around. A lot of ranking lists out there have this film near the bottom of the list, always with the first film on top, technically making this the biggest quality drop in the series, which has always seemed odd to me. Let's face it, y'all, there are some real stinkers in this franchise, and Raids Again was just never one I considered to be that bad, so I wanted to go through it today, and see just what's so supposedly terrible with it. First, let's start with... The film opens with pilots flying around, searching for schools of fish to report to the ships below. During this scene, we're introduced to the film's three main characters, Tsukuyoka, Kobayashi, and Hidema. So Kobayashi and Hidema, I'm pretty confident in. Y'all, I pronounced Tsukuyo's name in like 5 different ways throughout the course of this video, and I'm not sure if I got it right once, so I am sorry for butchering these names, y'all. Hidema working as one of the radio operators, while also being the daughter of the president of the fishery. Hidema and Tsukuyo are quickly established to be a couple through their romantic talk over the radio. Trouble arises as Kobayashi's plane falls out of the sky. The pilot is just barely able to make a crash landing on a nearby island. Sudako quickly goes to rescue his friend, and that's when the kaiju were first introduced. Godzilla, and one that's yet to have been named. Sudako and Kobayashi take shelter in a narrow rock wall as the kaiju swiftly rumble and tumble off the edge of the island. Back on the mainland, a group of scientists question the pilots, trying to determine who's the new creature. It's not long before they discover that the new kaiju is a species named Anguirus. Dr. Yama makes a brief appearance here. After he plays his copy of the first film, he tells the others that they may be able to lure Godzilla away from the mainland using bright lights. Their worst fears come to life as Godzilla seems to be steadily approaching the shoreline. But then he starts to change his course, so the residents have a nice celebration, during which Sudako and Hidema dance the night away. But then Godzilla does a 180 on them and starts to climb ashore right away, so everybody has to make a swift evacuation. Right as Godzilla steps into the shoreline, a blackout washes over Japan, and jets soar off, dropping flares far off into the sea in a vain hope of getting Godzilla's attention. And it works! Godzilla starts back off into the ocean, casually decimating a lighthouse as he turns around. The people of Osaka let out a great sigh of relief as it looks like they've been spared of Godzilla's destruction. And then a bunch of prisoners escape their paddy wagon, get in a little chase with the police, and in the process somehow manage to crash right into an oil refinery. Yeah, Godzilla swiftly turns right back around to the mainland, this time followed by Anguirus. Apparently the same flares that had drove Godzilla out had lured Anguirus in. The two soon find themselves in mortal combat, gashing and gnarling at the other, all while the nearby city crumbles beneath their feet. After knocking down the iconic Osaka castle, Godzilla pins Anguirus to the ground and bites down on his neck. A small sea of blood gushes out from Anguirus as he slowly dies. After that, Godzilla burns up the remains of his defeated foe, and then shoves off back to sea, leaving Osaka in a state of ruin. Seeing that all of his business has been crushed up, the president of the fishery strikes a lucky deal to relocate to Hokkaido. It soon becomes business as usual as Kobayashi flies over the ocean, directing the fishermen below to the bountiful harvest. After Tsukuyo and Hidema move to Hokkaido as well, the company has a banquet, during which Kobayashi lets it slip that he has his eye on a particular lady. But he won't tell who he's crushing on just yet. The meal is cut short, however, when Godzilla is spotted nearby. Tsukuyo quickly takes off to look for the kaiju. A small scene plays out where Kobayashi asks Hidema what women want. A cute scene that's cut short when Tsukuyo finally spots Godzilla. Realizing that his friend only has enough fuel to make a return trip, Kobayashi quickly flies off, in the process accidentally leaving his diary behind. Hidema looks inside to reveal that Kobayashi has been crushing on Hidema. Oh dear. Godzilla is cornered in an icy island. Kobayashi loses control and crashes into the top of the mountain. In his tragic death, he gives the idea for the others to trap Godzilla under the ice. A firewall is quickly erected to lock Godzilla inside as bombers cause tons and tons of ice to fall down on the kaiju, keeping him nice and preserved for the next movie. The film ends on a bittersweet note, most happy with the defeat of Godzilla, with Tsukado and Hidama left mourning the loss of their friend Kobayashi. Alright, before we get into the real nitty-gritty of it, let's go over some. Surprisingly, the iconic Godzilla theme is never used once in this film. Instead, we have this little number here that, while fine by itself, isn't nearly as memorable. Going over music and sound effects, I was surprised to see how subdued they seem to be in this film. During the big kaiju fight, only moderate sound effects with a low score is present, giving the battle a rather ominous tone compared to the rest of the Versus movies. That, mixed with the downright gruesome death of Anguirus, makes it where I'm not surprised that this film has influenced some analog horror as of late. Another thing of note here is how the design of Godzilla has changed from the original film. The original suit was a bulky, arduous affair that weighed over 200 pounds. It was only just practical enough for the actors to use it in the first film, where Godzilla is doing little more than walking into buildings, even though that too was difficult for them to do at times. To say the very least, this suit would not have worked for a monster fighting film, so a new one was made. Slimmed down and made to fit the suit actor better than the first, while also being a good deal more flexible for all the fighting scenes in the picture. This suit had a first in the series in its use of movable pupils. It's not used much in this film, but it's something that every subsequent Godzilla film would feature, so it's notable that Raids Again had them first. I like the jagged teeth he's shown to have in close-up shots. It reminds me a little of his design later in Shin Godzilla. I also really like the design of Anguirus. In concept. The look of the kaiju does stand out, and the filmmakers bring him to life rather well. But whenever Anguirus starts to stand up, it looks way too much like a guy in a suit. It's like they put a lot of effort into making the top of the suit look good, but didn't consider as much with the bottom. While we're talking about Anguirus, I also find it pretty funny that Godzilla's name was discovered through island legend and folklore, while Anguirus here was just straight up an extinct dinosaur whose name was in a textbook. The only returning character from the film is Dr. Yama, played once again by a name I refuse to pronounce. His appearance here is a bit odd. The other scientists ask him ways that they could possibly kill Godzilla, and he's here to once again state how impossible that would be. But never once is it shown that he's reluctant to kill the kaiju as he was in the first film. It's an odd bit of characterization that's just left out of the sequel. Also in that same scene, he mentions Godzilla's reaction towards bright light, which just comes right out of nowhere. Never once is it stated in the original film that Godzilla was attracted to bright light, so it's a rather notable retcon here. Okay, might as well bite the bullet and go over the... As I mentioned earlier, this film was kind of rushed through production, and there are certain scenes where you can really feel it. The scene where Tsukado is flying over for Kobayashi plays out fine, but it's cut together with exterior shots that seriously don't match up with the sets shown. It wouldn't have been that hard for them to fix. Just don't have the actor visible in the exterior shots, making it more believable that this is just a section of the island you're not seeing overhead. And just a little bit later you get to see a microphone clearly visible on the left-hand side of the screen. Whoops. And not to mention the creatures themselves. Their introduction plays out a bit odd. The actors here are clearly reacting to something that they hear or feel, but there's no sound effects to indicate that. And when the kaiju do come out, the actors have their back turned on the action. It's almost like the performers weren't given proper reference for where they were supposed to look. And the point of view of where the kaiju appear is a little odd. I'm not quite sure what this angle is supposed to be. On the topic of the kaiju, I suppose it's time to bring up one of the biggest problems with the film. They move way too fast. See, all of Godzilla's scenes in the first movie were filmed in slow motion. This gives some much needed weight for what's supposed to be a 160-foot tall, lurking beast. Here though, not only did they not slow down the footage, I swear it's been sped up in some scenes. Godzilla and Anguirus move and zoom about like they just injected coffee into their veins. There's no weight to the kaiju here. Apparently this was all because of an error when the filmmakers were shooting the scene. They did notice it, but seeing how they already destroyed all of their models, they either just didn't bother or just straight up didn't have enough time to reshoot the scene. Another example as to how the rush production stains the film. Another moment of note is the scene where Dr. Yama pulls out a reel of the first film to show the others. I kid you not when I say they play the first Godzilla attack scene almost in its entirety. It raises the question as to how the characters in the film got this footage in the first place, while also making Godzilla's design change more obvious to the viewer. Not to mention that this scene goes on for over 1 minute and 30 seconds. It's pretty blatant padding to say the very least. A very odd thing here is that certain scenes play out very similarly to sequences in the first film. As I mentioned earlier, Dr. Yama here rehashes a lot of the same stuff he previously said, going over how indestructible Godzilla is. Another familiar scene happens when the public are celebrating right before Godzilla makes his appearance. Although here it makes a lot less sense. In the original film, they were partying because they believed Godzilla was killed via some death charges. Here, though, they're celebrating because the kaiju had changed course. It's like, ah, heck yeah, someone else is gonna die instead of me, let's boogie. Not to mention the ending of both films. One of the main characters die in order to relinquish the threat of Godzilla, leading to both finishing on a bittersweet note. And again, it doesn't work nearly as well. Dr. Shirazawa purposely chose to die with Godzilla so that no one would force him to make another oxygen destroyer. Here though, Kobayashi just does his best Buddy Holly impression. It's not like he chose to do this, and it's not like he knew this would give the others the idea to bury Godzilla in the ice, so his death here isn't nearly as powerful. Although the film certainly tries to give his death more weight by revealing the fact that he was crushing on Hidema the whole time. Okay, I might as well dig into this now. As I mentioned earlier, Hidema and Tsukayo were established to be a couple. So it's just so bizarre how this movie reveals the fact that Kobayashi had a thing for Hidema literally right before he dies. The first time I watched this movie, I thought I just had to have missed something, but nope. The audience is left to assume that Kobayashi was trying to break apart the other's relationship. And Hidema's reaction to this is just really off. Like, if you found out that one of your good friends had a crush on you while you were already in an active relationship, I don't think this would be your reaction. It's like the film just completely forgets the fact that Hidema and Tsukayo were already together after this point. It's just a half-baked love triangle brought on in the last 20 minutes of the film. And I have a feeling it's only here because the first film had a love triangle, so they felt obliged to have one as well. Man, can you imagine what Tsukayo's response is going to be after he finds out his deceased friend was trying to take his partner? For his own sake, I really hope Hidema keeps that info from him. Oh, and I just have to talk about the whole prison escape sequence a little more. It may just be the most, and then this happened, scene I have ever seen in a film. The prisoners come out of nowhere. Their escape sequence is their introduction to the film. And they somehow manage to crash right into an oil refinery. The film purposely doesn't make it clear how they lost control of their vehicle, because let's face it, there is no justifiable reason for why they would crash like this. And again, all of this is here just so that the following explosion will lure Godzilla back to the shoreline. It's like a reverse Deus Ex Machina, honestly. What do you even call that? Okay, I just looked it up. Diabolus Ex Machina. This scene is a Diabolus Ex Machina. I'm probably not even pronouncing that right, but I don't even care. Surely, there was a smoother way to do this than by having a couple of bozos spring literally out of nowhere to mess everything up. Going back to the end of the film real quick, the sequence of Godzilla being buried by the ice goes on for way too long. It goes from them dropping bombs directly on Godzilla, to Kobayashi indirectly giving them idea for an avalanche, to them bombing the tops of the mountains, nearly burying Godzilla, but then they go back to their base to reload and discuss lines of formation, allowing Godzilla to fully escape. The Navy then traps Godzilla with a firewall, allowing the bombers to once again bomb the top of the mountain, this time burying Godzilla all the way up with ice. All in all, it takes up the last 14 minutes of the film. Far too much time for just scenes of Godzilla standing in the same spot, waving at the overhead planes. Also, what kind of sense does it make for Godzilla to be trapped in by a firewall? This is kind of his thing. Heck, even Anguirus is shown to be immune to fire. Until he's not, but I digress. Okay, that was all of my main misgivings with the film. Now, let's go over the... First off, I like the characters well enough. Except for the love triangle bit, but I've already gone over that. Their actual characterization is almost non-existent, but they're shown to be nice, hard-working men and women whose lives are seriously affected by the destruction. Their livelihoods have been destroyed. It's not clear if they'll be able to catch enough fish to eat or live off now. A lot of people said that this film was a lot lighter in tone than the first, which is true, but it's clear to see that an attempt was made to keep some of the seriousness from the first picture. Granted, all of that is a bit undermined by the fact that they just up and relocate to a different place after the kaiju fight, but I still think the film does a good job showing off how devastating the destruction is for the characters before they move. I really like these shots on the rooftop. They give a great sense as to how destroyed everything was in the fight. Speaking of the fight, it's really good stuff. Yes, the monsters still do move too fast, but they rumble and tumble with the best of them, setting a high bar for all of the films that follow. And you also get a lot of action in this film as well. It's a good 20-minute sequence from Godzilla first appearing on the shoreline to Anguirus being defeated. While not all of it is the most engaging, you do get a heck of a lot of monster action in this film. And this isn't a long movie, y'all. It's only 80 minutes long. Okay, in the script I wrote 8 minutes long, and that made me giggle a little bit. It doesn't waste your time, until the very end at least, and it keeps your attention through and through, which is not something I can say about every Godzilla film. So, remember what I said about this being considered one of the worst in the franchise? I think by now you know I don't agree with that assessment. I found this to be a decent, although certainly flawed, monster film. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised so many people dislike this one just because it had the unfortunate position of being a direct sequel to the first movie. Any other Godzilla film would look a lot worse if it had to be so closely compared to the original masterpiece. You know what? I'm gonna say it. Godzilla Raids Again is overhated. Way overhated in my opinion. I would honestly pop this one in over a sizable chunk of other films in the franchise. Godzilla Raids Again needs a re-evaluation in my opinion, because even though it may not be one of the best films in the franchise, it is certainly not one of the worst. Thank you for watching all the way to the end, and until next time, goodbye y'all.